So here we are, back to take another look at the SLX Nova and the Vortex Venom and compare them to one another. We're starting out at the dam on the Mississippi River, and I'm going to go ahead and get us zoomed in on the pilot house sitting on top of that barge. And that pilot house is going to be in the neighborhood of about 300 or 315 yards from where we're filming from, and the concrete wall behind it is going to be right about 400 yards. The white Connex boxes up on the dam are going to be about 425, to just give you some idea of the distances. And as you can see, both of these are going to be bright enough to be seen in this daylight, but the Nova Reticle is clearly brighter. The Venom is on maximum brightness and the Nova is on a 10 setting, so it is one setting below its maximum. And an important thing to take a look at here is always going to be the field of view and the size of the image we're seeing here. And we have to give that to the Venom having just a slightly larger field of view. And that's going to be more apparent when we get up here and focused on the crane structure that is sitting up on the wall, which is going to be at about 500 yards, as well as that pylon with the numbers on it, that's at about 500 yards. So let me just give it a second here and get both of these moved up to looking at the pillar of the dam, and then we'll point out a few things for you to look at. But in the meantime, we can see those guys walking and working around the dam. They're going to be closer to 550, 575 yards away. Unfortunately, in the Venom image, we do not have any of those guys walking around at the moment. But now that we have both of these settled more or less in the same position, I'd like to point out the field of view is more obvious here. If you go from the bottom to the top and look at the metal structures down there sitting on the barge at the 6 o'clock position, and then you see how much of the skyline we can see above the actual top of the dam, there is a noticeable difference in our field of view. So that's important. The other thing we see is maybe just a little bit more chromatic aberration on the Venom than we do on the SLX this day, but that's going to be kind of a hit or miss. On the naked eye, when you're looking through these, when I was looking through them before I started filming, there was almost no difference in the chromatic aberration that I was seeing with that extremely brightly lit background where the sun is behind the dam. And technically we're looking at the shadowed side of the dam, so I had to bring the brightness up so that we could make out the details that we are able to see. So I just wanted to point out that field of view difference, which is actually significant, and just the fact that the Vortex Venom has a larger image overall. But now I'm going to zoom us back out to 1 power, and we're going to pan over to the middle of the dam, which is going to put us at about 625 yards. Again, you see how with the brighter background, the Venom reticle is struggling to be noticeable, whereas our fiber illuminated Nova reticle is not struggling at all. And we get a chance to, again, to look at our 1x, which both of them are extremely good at 1x. I think the sharpness probably goes just slightly to the Nova. I suspect that Primary Arms sort of prioritized that 1x clarity a little bit more than Vortex did on the Venom. But we can make out quite a bit of detail on this dam and the gates, or the locks, whatever you want to call them. Our color representation between both of them is basically the same. Neither one of them really has a clear advantage, whether it be the greens in the grass of that tree or the yellow on the bumper on the end of that pier. Both of them are looking really good. Now let me get zoomed in. You'll just have to ignore the fact that the sky behind the Nova is pretty much washed out. The sun had come down a little bit and was really lighting up the clouds, so I had to just choose between being able to see what was in the shadows and having any real definition of the skyline behind it. And now on the Nova side, we see a lot more chromatic aberration because of that. And the one thing I do want to point out in the Vortex Venom side of the thing is now we do have some gentlemen working, and those guys are going to be at about 400 yards, more or less, between 350 and 400 yards. But we also have the chance to look at a little bit more different colors. We have some oranges out there for their safety equipment. We have the red roofs. We have that green. I believe that is a portable generator. And all of those colors are well represented. I do like the fact that we can see the boat in the Venom side where it is being held in the lock before it's allowed to go down the river. That's kind of neat. But if we look for the actual fine details in the lines, on this day I apparently did a slightly better job with the Vortex, or excuse me, with the Nova, getting the focus right, because we have an extremely crisp image, whereas on the Venom side it's more just the center of the image that's really crisp. But to the naked eye, they are almost indistinguishable, and I honestly favor the Venom's total sharpness to the Nova, but it is extremely close. I just like this position because it gives us a chance to see how these things perform in the image that we get in a more complicated environment than just out there on the floodplain. And the last sort of thing that I want to do is pan up here above the dam where it is extremely bright and give you guys just a very clear idea of what those reticles are going to look like against a brightly lit background, which, you know, the sun behind clouds, we can't do much more for brightness than that, other than if the sun was just right in the view. But we are still able to make out quite a bit of detail in that framework of that crane, even though it is contrasting and having quite a bit of chromatic aberration. Here we can see the cables, we can see the lines coming down from the jib down to the hooks, and we can make out much of the scaffolding that makes up the crane itself. But we're going to go ahead and go from here and go out to the floodplain and compare these reticles against some actual targets. So the first distance we're going to do out here on the floodplain is going to be 300 yards. And as before with the other LPVO comparisons that I've done, we have our full-size IPSC white paper silhouette. We have an 8-inch gong over there hanging just at the back of my SUV. And then we're also, from this position, going to be able to look at the wheel of the SUV and some of the area regulation signs, which are a 12 by 16 sheet of paper or plastic, whatever they're made out of. And the first thing we're going to do is use our ranging brackets on both the Nova and on the Venom, and they both correspond well with that IPSC target. Now with the Venom, we obviously have to go up above our center to get to our ranging ladder, determine our range, and then come back down to our first line of dots, which is the 300-yard range. And the important thing with the Venom is that we have the wind corrections for the 5, 10, and 15 mile an hour winds, which we can see contrasted well against that brown and white paper. Then we quickly take a range off of what is a known size 18-inch wheel, and while it is not a perfect match, that is because the SUV is approximately 25 yards behind those targets, so it shouldn't be an exact match, but it is pretty close. And then we'll go ahead and go over here and look at our reticle against our 8-inch gong. And even at 300 yards, the SLX reticle is starting to obscure that gong pretty good, whereas the Nova reticle, even though I have it on the 400 yard instead of the 300 yard line, does not really cover up any of that reticle. You would easily be able to target that with those wind holds as well as the dots. And then, like I said, the last target I want to look at here is these 12 by 16-inch targets, which are a reasonable sized target to be shooting at 300 yards. That's going to correspond to about a 3 MOA width, and both of our reticles are easily able to target that and without obstructing a bunch of the overall sheet of paper, with the Venom clearly being the finer one of the two. And in the case of the Nova, on any of these targets, if there was much wind, you could potentially use the end of the hash mark as a wind reference, but if you needed more than that, you would then have to just go out in space and potentially use those little hash marks on the 3 o'clock and 9 o'clock stadia, but they are pretty small and not a very good reference as compared to the actual wind corrections on the Venom reticle. But that's basically going to do it for 300 yards, and we're going to go ahead and quickly go out to 500 yards and see how these reticles look at that distance. Well, in the meantime, we did have some people show up and park down there by my vehicle. We're not going to pay them much attention. And we just get a good look at the 1X here, which are both looking pretty good. Again, I think the SLX has a slightly superior 1X, but I think that's just because it's intended to, because that whole reticle design is really designed to be very fast at the 1X magnification. And on this time, I'm going to go ahead and get these magnifications turned on, or not the magnification, get the illuminations turned on. And in this sort of 7 p.m. setting sun kind of light, the Venom is definitely red and draws your attention, and the Nova is at a 9 on its illumination, and clearly the brighter of the two. And once again, we see that our 500-yard ranging marks are accurate to our IPSC target. And we can see that the Venom reticle is still very fine against that target, where we are not obstructing any meaningful amount of it, and we can see that our wind dots are still easy to use if we were needing to make those corrections. As for our measurement against my 18-inch wheel, the 500-yard hash is pretty good on the Nova. I didn't try to do it on the Venom because I just couldn't see it clearly enough on my phone screen to really be able to hold it in the correct position for you guys to make that call. So I just didn't bother doing it. Now, when we get over to this 8-inch gong, we can see where the Venom reticle starts to set itself apart from the Nova. Because at 500 yards, that third hash mark on the Nova reticle is basically covering the majority of that plate, whereas the Venom reticle is still fine enough you can make those, precise corrections. And the same is going to be true with the Venom reticle over there on our 12 by 16-inch regulation sign. And here in just a second, I'll slide over there. Here we go. With the Nova, and on a target that size, we are kind of where we were at 500 yards, or excuse me, at 300 yards with the 8-inch plate. Now we have a decent amount of target still visible around that reticle at the third hash mark for 500 yards, but it is starting to obscure quite a bit of it. And the same is going to be true at this distance, more so than it was at 300 yards, that any wind calls you're going to have to make are basically going to be holding out in space with the Nova reticle, whereas the Venom reticle is going to give you the assistance of those BDC dots. I don't think there's much else to say about these reticles, and I would just like to thank all of you who have taken the time to watch this video. If you enjoyed it, maybe think about subscribing or hitting that like button. And also, if you have any thoughts or questions, feel free to put them down in the comment section. I would love to hear those. And with that, I will turn you guys loose, and I will see you in the next video.